1946. New York Harbor. Coal smoke drifted thick across the water as the SS Marine Flasher eased toward the dock. The ship's horn groaned long and low, a sound that seemed to carry all the weight of the Atlantic crossing. Below deck, hundreds of German women stood pressed together, each clutching a small suitcase, their eyes holding equal parts hope and terror. They were the German war brides, wives of American soldiers they had met during the chaos of war. For them, this voyage across the ocean was not simply a journey. It was the first step toward finding life again. But when their feet touched the gangway, silence fell like a curtain. The Americans waiting on the dock did not cheer. They stared with cold eyes, suspicion woven into every glance. A few whispered to one another, "They married the enemy." In the crowd, Helene Müller stood clutching a photograph. She was 26 years old, thin from months of rationing, her dark hair tied back with a faded ribbon. The man in the photo wore an American uniform. She had not seen him since 1944. She believed he was still alive. She believed he was waiting somewhere in this vast country she had never seen. But what awaited her on that dock was not a welcoming embrace. It was a letter that carried news she could not yet imagine. In that moment, Helene did not know that the man who would deliver that letter, Jack Turner, a widowed American veteran, would change her life forever. Between tears, doubt, and the shadows of the past, they would learn to forgive. And they would discover what it meant to be human again, in an America that was trying desperately to forget the war. The gangway creaked under the weight of footsteps. Women descended slowly, clutching their belongings, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Some carried infants wrapped in thin blankets. Others held the hands of small children who blinked at the strange new world with wide, uncertain eyes. The air smelled of salt water and diesel fuel and something else, something harder to name. Distrust, perhaps, or grief that had not yet found words. Helene moved with the crowd, her legs unsteady after weeks at sea. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times during the crossing. She had pictured her husband's face in the crowd, his arms reaching for her, his voice calling her name. But now that she stood on American soil, the dream felt fragile, like glass held too tightly. A man in a worn military jacket pushed through the crowd. His face was weathered, his eyes tired, but kind. He carried an envelope in one hand. Jack Turner had been asked to deliver it. The last letter, the final message from a friend who had not made it home. When he looked up and saw Helene standing there, something stirred in him. Compassion, perhaps, or recognition of a pain he knew too well. He approached slowly. She saw him coming and her heart lifted for just a moment. Then she saw the envelope. Then she saw his expression, and she understood. The ship behind them let out another long, mournful horn. The sound echoed across the harbor, across the city, across the distance between who they had been and who they were about to become. Jack stood before Helene, the letter heavy in his hand. Around them, the crowd surged and voices rose in reunions, both joyful and strained. But in the space between them, there was only stillness. He had rehearsed what he would say. He had practiced the words during the train ride to the harbor, during the long wait on the dock. But now, looking at her face, at the hope still clinging there like morning frost, the words felt impossible. She looked at the envelope, then at him. Her lips parted, as if to ask a question, but no sound came. She already knew. The heart knows, before the mind accepts. Jack extended the letter toward her. His voice was quiet, nearly lost beneath the noise of the harbor. "Mrs. Müller, I served with your husband. He asked me to give this to you if anything happened." Her hands trembled as she took it. The paper was worn, folded and refolded many times. She did not open it immediately. She simply held it, staring at the handwriting on the front. Her name, written in English, in a hand she recognized from a lifetime ago. "He spoke of you often," Jack said. "He wanted you to know that he loved you, that he never stopped." Rain began to fall then. Light at first, then heavier. The crowd scattered toward covered areas, but Helene stood motionless, rain soaking through her coat. The letter pressed against her chest. Jack stayed beside her, uncertain whether his presence was a comfort or an intrusion. When she finally opened the letter, her fingers moved carefully, as if the paper might disintegrate. She read in silence, her eyes moving across the lines, her expression shifting from hope to understanding to something darker. Grief. Yes, but also something like abandonment, like being set adrift in an ocean with no shore in sight. When she finished reading, she folded the letter and looked up at Jack. Her eyes were dry. The tears would come later, in private, in the dark. "He is gone," she said simply. Not a question, a statement of fact. "Yes," Jack said. "I'm sorry." She nodded slowly. Behind her, the ship's engines rumbled as it prepared to depart. The sound of machinery, of movement forward, of life continuing whether one was ready or not. "I have nowhere to go," she said. The words were not a plea, just another fact, spoken aloud into the rain. Jack looked at her for a long moment. He thought of his own losses. His wife, taken by illness 2 years prior. His daughter, Clara, waiting at home, asking when things would feel normal again. He thought of all the ways war had broken the world, and how some breaks could not be mended, only lived with. "Come with me," he said. "For tonight, at least. There's a boarding house not far. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." She studied his face, searching for deception, for danger, for whatever signs one looks for when trusting a stranger in a strange land. But she found only exhaustion and a kind of weary decency that felt, in that moment, like the only solid thing in her world. "All right," she said. They walked through the rain-slicked streets of New York, past buildings that seemed to reach impossibly high, past strangers who moved with purpose and certainty. Helene walked beside Jack Turner, a man she had known for less than an hour, carrying everything she owned in one small suitcase and a grief too large to name. The boarding house was modest, tucked between a pharmacy and a tailor shop. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, asked no questions when Jack explained that Mrs. Müller needed a room for the night. Money changed hands. A key was produced. Jack carried Helene's suitcase up 3 flights of narrow stairs. At the door to her room, he paused. "I'll come by tomorrow morning," he said. "We'll talk about what comes next." "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He considered the question. "Because someone should," he said finally. "Because the war is over, and we're supposed to remember how to be decent again." She nodded, though she looked uncertain, as if decency were a concept she had forgotten existed. That night, alone in the small room with its single bed and cracked window, Helene read the letter again and again. Her husband had written about love and regret, and hope that she would build a new life. He had released her from any obligation to mourn forever. He had given her permission to survive. But surviving felt, in that moment, like the hardest thing anyone had ever asked of her. Across the city, Jack Turner sat in his hotel room, unable to sleep. He thought about the woman he had left at the boarding house. He thought about all the German war brides arriving on American shores, carrying their secrets and sorrows, hoping for acceptance in a country that had spent years learning to hate everything they represented. He thought about his daughter waiting in Ohio, about the garage he ran, about the quiet life he had built from the ruins of his old one, and he wondered what he had just invited into that careful, fragile peace. Morning came gray and cold. Jack returned to the boarding house as promised. Helene was waiting in the small lobby, her suitcase beside her, her expression unreadable. She had not slept. He could tell. Neither had he. "I've been thinking," he said. "I live in Ohio. Small town. I run a garage. It's not much, but there's a spare room. You could stay there while you figure things out. Find work, maybe. Get on your feet." She looked at him with something like disbelief. "You would do this? For someone you don't know?" "My daughter needs to see that people can still be kind," he said. "And maybe I need to remember it too." Helene was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up her suitcase. "All right," she said. "I will come to Ohio." They took a train west. The journey lasted 2 days. Through the window, Helene watched America unfold. Vast and strange, and nothing like she had imagined. Small towns appeared and disappeared. Farms stretched to horizons she had never known existed. The land itself seemed to breathe with a kind of wild possibility that made her feel both hopeful and terrified. Jack spoke little during the journey, but his presence was steady. He bought her meals in the dining car. He made sure she had a blanket when the night grew cold. Small kindnesses that felt enormous. When they finally arrived in Millbrook, Ohio, it was late afternoon. The town was exactly as Jack had described it. Small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where strangers were noticed immediately. Jack's house sat at the end of a tree-lined street. It was a simple 2-story structure, white paint peeling slightly at the corners, a garage attached to one side. A girl of about 8 stood on the front porch, watching their approach with curious eyes. "That's Clara," Jack said. "My daughter." The girl studied Helene with the frank, unfiltered gaze of children. "You're the German lady," she said. "Clara," Jack said quietly. "It's all right," Helene said. She knelt to be at eye level with the child. "Yes, I am from Germany. My name is Helene. Did you know Hitler?" Clara asked. "Clara," Jack said again, more firmly, but Helene shook her head. "It is a fair question." She looked at the girl. "No, I did not know him, but I lived in a country where he ruled, and I saw terrible things. Things I wish I had not seen." Clara considered this. Then she said, "My mother died." "Did anyone you love die?" "Yes," Helene said softly. "Many people," the girl nodded, satisfied with this shared understanding. "Okay, you can come inside." And just like that, Helene entered the house that would become her home. The spare room was small but clean. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out onto the backyard where an old swing set stood rusting in the grass. Jack showed her where everything was. The bathroom, the kitchen, the telephone in the hallway that rarely rang. "Make yourself comfortable," he said. "We eat dinner around 6. Nothing fancy." That first evening was awkward with the weight of strangers learning to share space. Clara chattered through the meal, filling the silences with questions about Germany, about the ocean, about whether Helene had ever seen a castle. Jack ate quietly, occasionally redirecting his daughter's more pointed inquiries. After dinner, Helene insisted on washing the dishes. Clara stood beside her, drying each plate carefully. Through the kitchen window, the sun set in shades of orange and gold, painting the ordinary neighborhood with a beauty that made Helene's chest ache. This was not the America she had imagined, but perhaps it was the one she needed. Days turned into weeks. Helene established a routine. She woke early and made breakfast. She cleaned the house, mended clothes, tended the small garden behind the garage. She was careful not to intrude, not to overstep, always aware that she was a guest in someone else's life. Clara warmed to her quickly. The child taught her English phrases, giggling at Helene's pronunciation. In return, Helene taught her simple German words: Danke, Bitte, Guten Morgen. The language lessons became a game they played, a bridge between worlds. Jack watched these exchanges with something like wonder. His daughter had been quiet since her mother's death, withdrawn into a grief she could not articulate. But now, with Helene's presence, something had shifted. Laughter returned to the house, a kind of lightness that had been missing. But the town did not welcome Helene as Clara had. Word spread quickly. Jack Turner had brought home a German woman. People talked. They always did in small towns. At the grocery store, conversations stopped when Helene entered. Eyes followed her down the aisles. No one spoke to her directly, but she heard the whispers, heard the judgment in their voices. The mechanic's shop faced similar treatment. Customers who had been coming to Jack for years suddenly remembered other garages they preferred. Men who had served with him in the war stopped by to express their concerns. You know what people are saying, one of them told Jack one afternoon. About you and that German girl. Her name is Helene, Jack said, not looking up from the engine he was working on. I'm just saying. People don't understand why you'd bring one of them here. After everything, Jack set down his wrench and turned to face the man. The war is over, Tom. Not for everyone, Tom said quietly. He gestured to his left leg, the one that ended at the knee, replaced by a prosthetic. Some of us carry it every day. Jack had no answer for that, because it was true. The war had ended on paper, in treaties and surrender documents. But in the bodies and minds of those who had fought it, the war continued. Still, he did not send Helene away. He could not have explained why, even to himself. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was a belief, however fragile, that people could be more than their worst moments. That nations could be. 2. At night, when the house was quiet, Helene sat by the window in her room. She thought about Dresden, about the night the sky turned red and the world became fire. She remembered running through streets that no longer existed, past bodies that would never be identified, carrying nothing but the clothes she wore and a desperate need to survive. She had been a nurse during the war, had tended to soldiers on both sides, German and Allied alike. In the prison camp where she worked, she had done what she could to ease suffering, even when it meant defying orders, even when it meant risking her own safety. One of those soldiers had been an American, William Müller, a German-American who spoke her language, who looked at her with eyes that held something other than hate. They had talked during his recovery. Short conversations at first, then longer ones. About life before the war. About dreams for after. When the camp was liberated, he had promised to return for her. And somehow, impossibly, he had. They had married in a rushed ceremony, paperwork filed through military channels. Everything happening so fast there was barely time to think. Then he had shipped out again. And she had waited. And then came the letter from Jack Turner, telling her that her husband, her hope, her ticket to a new life, was gone. Now she sat in Ohio, in a stranger's house, in a country that did not want her, trying to figure out what came next. Downstairs, Jack Turner was having similar thoughts. He stood in his garage, surrounded by the familiar smell of oil and metal, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had meant to do a good deed, to help someone who needed help, but he had not anticipated how his town would react, had not thought through how complicated kindness could become. His wife, Sarah, would have known what to do. She had always been better with people, better at navigating the complicated social currents of small-town life. But Sarah was gone, and he was left to figure it out alone. Through the window, he could see the light in Helene's room. She was still awake, he realized, still grappling with her own demons. 2 people, he thought. 2 people trying to outrun the past. Maybe that was enough common ground to build on. The nightmares came to both of them, though neither spoke of them. Helene would wake gasping, the sound of bombs still echoing in her ears, the smell of smoke filling her nose even though the room was peaceful and still. She would sit up, heart racing, reminding herself that she was safe, that the war was over, that the fire was only memory. Jack's dreams took him back to the Ardennes, to the winter of '44 when the cold was so fierce it felt like a living enemy. He would wake with his hands clenched, reaching for weapons that were no longer there, searching for threats that had dissolved into the dark. One night, he came downstairs for water and found Helene sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in front of her. Her eyes distant. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "I'm sorry. I did not mean to disturb you." "You didn't." He filled a glass from the tap and sat down across from her. "I don't sleep much these days anyway." They sat in silence for a while. Then Helene said, "Do you dream about it? The war?" "Every night," he admitted. "You? Every night," she echoed. "Does it get better?" she asked. With time, he wanted to lie, to offer false comfort. But instead he said, "I don't know. I'll tell you when I find out." She smiled at that. Just a little. It was the first genuine smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less burdened. "What do you dream about?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Fire. Always fire." He nodded. He understood. His own dreams were filled with snow and blood, and the faces of men who had not made it home. "I dream about cold," he said, "and about not being fast enough." To do what? To save them. Any of them. All of them. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was a simple gesture, unbidden and unexpected. "You cannot save everyone," she said softly. "I know," he said. "But knowing doesn't help." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." They sat like that for a while, two survivors in a dark kitchen, connected by loss and the strange comfort of shared understanding. After that night, things changed subtly between them. Not romance, nothing so simple, but a recognition that they were fighting similar battles, that they carried similar scars. Helene began helping at the garage. She had good hands, quick and precise from her nursing days. She learned to change oil, to replace spark plugs, to diagnose engine troubles by sound alone. The work was satisfying in a way she had not expected. Concrete. Fixable. Unlike the wounds she had tended during the war, these machines could actually be healed. Clara loved having her there. She would finish school and run straight to the garage, where Helene and Jack would be working side by side, their hands covered in grease, a kind of peace settling over them that came from honest labor. The townspeople noticed. Of course they noticed. In Millbrook, everything was noticed. Mary Thompson was among the most vocal critics. She had lost her husband at Normandy, had received the folded flag and the formal letter of condolence. She saw Helene as a symbol of everything that had taken her beloved James from her. One afternoon, Mary confronted Helene outside the grocery store. A small crowd gathered, sensing drama. "You have a lot of nerve," Mary said, her voice shaking with anger. "Coming here. Living among us. Pretending you belong." Helene stood very still, her grocery basket clutched in both hands. "I do not pretend anything," she said quietly. "You're one of them," Mary continued. "You're one of the people who killed my husband, who killed our boys, and now you're here, taking our jobs, our homes, our mercy." "I did not kill anyone," Helene said. "I was a nurse. I saved lives." "German lives," Mary spat. "You saved Germans while Americans died. I saved everyone I could," Helene said, her voice stronger now. "I did not choose who lived or died. The war did that." "The war," Mary laughed bitterly. "You talk about it like it was weather, like it was something that just happened. But it wasn't. Your people started it. Your people wanted it." Helene's hands tightened on the basket. "You think I wanted war? You think any of us wanted to watch our cities burn? To lose everyone we loved? To live in fear every single day? You should have stopped him," Mary said. "You should have stopped Hitler, and you should have stopped yours from dropping bombs on children." Helene shot back. Then, more quietly, "But we don't get to choose what our countries do. We only get to choose how we live with what they've done." The crowd was silent now. Mary's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Finally, she turned and walked away. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, disappointed that the confrontation had not escalated further. Helene stood alone on the sidewalk, trembling, her grocery basket forgotten. A moment later, Jack appeared at her side. He had heard about the confrontation from someone in the store. "Let's go home," he said gently. She nodded, unable to speak. He took the basket from her hands and guided her toward his truck. That evening, Clara asked why Mrs. Thompson had been mean to Helene. Jack struggled to find words that would explain hatred to a child who had never learned it. "People are angry," he said finally. "The war hurt everyone, and when people hurt, sometimes they look for someone to blame. But Helen didn't hurt anyone," Clara said. "No," Jack agreed. She didn't. Then why do they blame her? Because she's different. Because she's from the place they learned to hate during the war. And they haven't learned how to stop hating yet. Clara frowned, considering this. Then she said, "That's stupid." Jack smiled despite himself. "Yes," he said. "It is. But stupid or not, the hatred was real. And it was getting worse." A week later, someone spray-painted the word traitor across the garage door. Jack arrived in the morning to find it, the red paint still wet and dripping. He stood staring at it for a long moment, something cold and hard settling in his chest. Helene saw it when she came out to help with the morning's work. Her face went very still. "You should send me away," she said quietly, "before this gets worse." "No," Jack said. "They will not stop. You know this. They will make your life impossible. Clara's life impossible. I don't care. But I do," she said. "I cannot let you lose everything because of me." He turned to face her. "You want to know what I lost? I lost my wife to illness I couldn't afford to treat. I lost friends in a war that shouldn't have happened. I lost the ability to sleep through the night without dreaming about dead men in the snow. That's what I lost." He gestured at the garage, at the hateful word painted across it. This is just paint. Just ignorance. I'm not losing anything that matters." "What about Clara?" "Clara is learning that we stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's not a loss. That's a gift." Helene looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up a brush and a can of white paint. "Then we paint over it," she said. They worked together in silence, covering the slur with layer after layer of white until it disappeared completely. It took most of the morning. By the time they finished, neighbors had gathered to watch. Some looked ashamed. Others looked angry that the message had been erased, but Jack and Helene said nothing. They simply cleaned their brushes and went back to work. That afternoon, a man came to the garage. He was older, in his 60s perhaps, with a weathered face and careful eyes. He stood in the doorway, watching Helene work for several minutes before speaking. "You don't remember me," he said finally. Helene looked up, startled. She studied his face, searching her memory. Then her eyes widened. "The prison camp," she whispered. "You were there." He nodded slowly. "I was. POW. Captured in 44. She stood, wiping her hands on a rag, her heart racing. "I remember. You had pneumonia. Everyone thought you would die. I should have," he said. "Would have if not for you. You smuggled me extra medicine, extra blankets, risked yourself to keep me alive." Helene said nothing. She had done what she could for many prisoners. It had never seemed like enough. "I came back here after the war," the man continued. "Heard Jack had brought home a German girl. Heard people talking, saying you were Nazi, saying you were no good." He paused, but I knew that couldn't be right. Because the woman who saved my life was no Nazi. She was an angel. His eyes were wet now. "I came to say thank you. And to tell anyone who'll listen that you're a good person. A hero, even." Helene shook her head. "I am not a hero. I just did what anyone should do. That's what makes you one," he said quietly. He left shortly after, but word of his visit spread through the town. Some people dismissed it, but others began to reconsider their assumptions. The tide was turning, slowly, painfully, but turning nonetheless. Winter settled over Millbrook. Snow covered the ground, the trees, the roofs of houses. The world went quiet under its white blanket. Inside Jack's house, a different kind of warmth was growing. Helene baked bread using recipes her grandmother had taught her. The smell filled the house, rich and comforting. Clara learned to help, her small hands kneading dough, flour dusting her nose. They decorated for Christmas together. Jack brought down boxes from the attic, ornaments wrapped in newspaper, a small artificial tree that had seen better days. Helene taught Clara German carols. Clara taught Helene American ones. On Christmas Eve, they sat together by the fireplace. Jack had made hot chocolate. Clara had fallen asleep on the couch, her head in Helene's lap. The radio played softly in the corner, Bing Crosby singing about white Christmases. "She loves you," Jack said quietly, nodding toward his daughter. "I love her," Helene replied, her hand resting gently on Clara's hair. "And Jack stopped, uncertain how to finish. Helene looked at him. "I know," she said softly. "I do too." It was not a declaration. Not romance in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, more fundamental. Recognition. Partnership. Two damaged people finding their way toward wholeness together. "I never thought I'd feel this again," Jack said. "This sense of home." "Home," Helene repeated. "I am not sure I know what that means anymore." "Maybe it's this," Jack said. "Maybe it's just moments like this. Small, quiet, safe." Helene smiled. "Then yes, this is home, but peace is always fragile." And in Millbrook, there were those who would not let go of their anger. In early January, a former soldier named Dale Murphy came to the garage. He had served in Europe, had fought through France, and into Germany itself. He walked with a limp, a souvenir from the Battle of Hurtgen Forest. He stood in the garage entrance, staring at Helene. Then his face changed. Recognition dawned, followed by something darker. "I know you," he said. Helene looked up from the carburetor she was cleaning. "I don't think so." "No, I do. You were at the POW camp, near Frankfurt." His voice was rising now. "You were one of the nurses." "Yes," Helene said carefully. "I was." "You were a Nazi," he said flatly. "I was a nurse," she corrected. "I was not political. I just tried to help people." "Help people?" He laughed bitterly. "You stood by while we were starved, while we were beaten, while men died in those filthy barracks." "I did what I could," Helene said. "It was not enough. I know that. But I did what I could." "You were one of them," Dale said, his voice shaking with rage. "You're one of the people who put me in that place, who took months of my life, who made me." He stopped, his hands clenching into fists. Jack stepped forward. "Dale, that's enough. You defend her?" Dale turned his anger on Jack now. "You know what she is, what she represents." "I know she's a person," Jack said firmly. "I know she lost as much as any of us. More, probably." "She's a Nazi," Dale repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it more true. "She's a nurse who saved lives," Jack said, "including American lives. I have proof. Testimony from men who were there." But Dale was beyond reason. He pointed a trembling finger at Helene. "I want her gone. Out of this town. Out of this country. Send her back to the rubble she came from." He left before either of them could respond. But the damage was done. By evening, the story had spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The German woman was a Nazi. She had worked in the camps. She was dangerous. That night, someone threw a rock through Jack's front window. It landed in the living room, glass scattering across the floor where Clara had been playing just hours before. Jack stood amid the shards, his jaw tight, his hands curled into fists. Helene stood on the stairs, her face pale in the dim light. "I have to leave," she said. "I have to go before someone gets hurt." "No," Jack said. "Please," she whispered. "Please. I cannot watch you lose everything because of me." "Where would you go?" he asked. "Back to Germany?" "To what? The country doesn't exist anymore. It's rubble and ruins and occupation zones." "Back to New York? To live alone in some boarding house, hated by everyone, belonging nowhere? It would be better than this." "No," he said again, more gently. "It wouldn't." He walked up the stairs until he stood just below her. "Listen to me. I know you're scared. I know you feel like a burden. But you're not. You're part of this family now. You're part of Clara's life. Part of my life. And I don't care what people say. I don't care what they think. We stand together. They will destroy you," she said. "Then we'll rebuild," he replied. "That's what we do. That's what survivors do." She looked at him with eyes that held too much pain. too much history. But also, finally, a glimmer of something like hope. Together, she whispered. Together, he confirmed. The town meeting was called for Saturday evening at the First Methodist Church. Everyone in Millbrook seemed to be there, packed into pews and standing along the walls. The mood was tense, expectant. Dale Murphy stood at the front, his voice carrying through the space. We have a problem in this town. We have one of them living among us, working among us, pretending to be one of us. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I say we send her back, Dale continued. We owe her nothing. We owe ourselves everything. More agreement. Louder now. Jack stood up. May I speak? The room went quiet. People turned to look at him. Some of you know me, Jack said. Some of you served with me. All of you know I lost my wife, that I'm raising my daughter alone, that I've never been one for drama or politics or any of this. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Helene Müller came here with nothing. She lost her husband, her country, her home. She came to America looking for a new start. And what did we give her? Suspicion, hatred, paint on walls and rocks through windows. She's a German, someone shouted from the back. So was my grandfather, Jack replied. So were a lot of our grandparents. We're a nation of people from somewhere else. That's supposed to be our strength, not our shame. This is different, Mary Thompson said. She was one of them during the war. She was a nurse, Jack said. She saved American lives. I have statements from 3 men who were in that POW camp. Men who say Helene Müller risked her own safety to help them, to keep them alive. He pulled papers from his pocket, unfolded them. Tom Bradshaw. You all know Tom. He was there. He says Helene smuggled him medicine when he had dysentery, probably saved his life. Henry Walsh from over in Springdale. Same story. And Dale here. Whether he wants to admit it or not, Helene was one of the nurses who treated his leg when he first arrived at that camp. Dale's face went red. That doesn't change what she represents. What does she represent? Jack asked. A woman trying to survive, trying to rebuild, trying to be decent in a world that wasn't decent to her. He looked around the room, meeting eyes, holding gazes. The war is over. We won. We get to decide what that victory means. Does it mean we become the very thing we fought against? Hateful, cruel, unforgiving, silence. Then, from the front row, an elderly woman stood up. Mrs. Patterson, who had lost 2 sons in the war, cleared her throat. I want to say something, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. I have every reason to hate Germans. My boys died fighting them. I get letters from their friends telling me what they saw over there. The camps, the killing, all of it. She paused, her hands gripping the pew in front of her. But I also remember what my pastor said the day the war ended. He said, now comes the harder part. Now we have to remember how to love our enemies. I didn't understand what he meant then. I thought he was crazy. She looked directly at Helene, who stood at the back of the church, half hidden in shadow. But maybe he was right. Maybe the real victory isn't in defeating them. It's in not becoming them. Another silence. Then another person stood. And another. Not everyone, but enough. A man named Robert Chen spoke about his parents being held in internment camps during the war, about understanding what it meant to be judged for your ancestry rather than your actions. A woman named Sarah Goldman talked about her relatives in Europe, about loss that transcended nationality. And slowly, painfully, the mood in the room began to shift. Not complete acceptance, not forgiveness, all at once, but a crack in the wall of hate. A small opening through which light might enter. Dale Murphy remained standing at the front, his face dark with anger. You're all fools, he said. You'll regret this. He stormed out, slamming the church door behind him. A few others followed. But most stayed. Finally, the pastor stood. I think we've heard enough for tonight. This is not something we'll resolve in one meeting. But perhaps we can agree on this much. Helene Müller has committed no crime. She has the right to live here, work here, exist here. Whether we welcome her warmly or simply tolerate her presence, that's up to each of us individually. But we will not drive her out. We will not be a town that tears itself apart over one woman's nationality. It was not the rousing endorsement Helene might have hoped for, but it was enough. It was permission to stay. After the meeting, people filed out slowly. Some nodded to Jack as they passed. A few even nodded to Helene. Mary Thompson walked by without looking at either of them. Her face set in stone, but she did not spit, did not curse. It was a small victory, perhaps, but a victory, nonetheless. Outside, in the cold January night, Jack and Helene stood by his truck. Clara was with a neighbor, spared from witnessing the spectacle. "Thank you," Helene said quietly. "For speaking, for standing up. You would have done the same," Jack said. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if I'm that brave. You crossed an ocean to start over," he said. "You wake up every day in a place that doesn't want you and keep going anyway. That's the definition of brave." She smiled, though tears were starting to fall now. All the fear and stress of the past weeks finally breaking through. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I know," he said. He put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture of comfort, of solidarity. "Let's go home. Home." The word still felt strange in her mouth, but less strange than it had before. Winter turned slowly toward spring. The snow melted, revealing brown grass and mud and the first tentative shoots of green. The garage stayed open, though business remained slow. Some customers returned, sheepish, apologetic. Others stayed away, their boycott a quiet but persistent form of judgment. But Jack and Helene managed. They fixed cars, painted the fence, planted seeds in the garden behind the house. Clara grew an inch, lost a tooth, learned to ride a bicycle without training wheels. Life, in other words, continued. Smaller than before. Perhaps. Quieter. But real. One morning in March, a Navy officer arrived at the house. He wore his dress uniform, his face grave and formal. Jack answered the door, his heart immediately sinking. Official visits were never good news. "I'm looking for Mrs. Helene Müller," the officer said. Helene came to the door, wiping flour from her hands. She had been making bread. "Yes? Ma'am, I have something for you." He handed her an envelope. "This letter was discovered in a Navy facility in Virginia. It was written by your late husband but never sent. The postal system during the end of the war was chaotic. Sometimes things got lost. We're trying to return what we can." Helene took the envelope with trembling hands. It was addressed to her in William's handwriting, postmarked from April of 1945, just weeks before his death. "Thank you," she managed to say. The officer nodded and left. Jack closed the door behind him. Helene stood in the hallway, staring at the envelope, afraid to open it. "Do you want privacy?" Jack asked gently. She shook her head. "No, please stay." They sat at the kitchen table. Clara was at school. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Helene opened the envelope carefully, as if it might crumble at her touch. The letter was several pages long, written in English. William had known she was learning the language, had wanted to help her practice. She read it slowly, her lips moving silently over the words. "My dearest Helene," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I did not make it home. I hope that is not the case. I hope I am there with you now, holding you, telling you in person all the things I am writing here. But just in case, I want you to know them." The letter went on to describe his hopes for their future together. The house he wanted to buy, the children he hoped they would have, the ordinary, beautiful life he imagined beyond the war. But then, in the final paragraph, the tone shifted. I know I am asking you to come to a country where you will not be welcomed, where people will judge you for where you were born rather than who you are. It is not fair. Nothing about this war has been fair, but I want you to come anyway. Not for me, if I am gone, but for yourself, because you deserve a chance at happiness. You deserve to build something new from the ashes of the old world, and if I am not there when you arrive, please do not mourn me forever. Find someone who sees you as I see you. Someone kind. Someone good. Promise me, you will let yourself be happy again. Promise me you will not let the war win by stealing your future. Love always, William. Helene set the letter down, her vision blurred with tears. Jack said nothing, simply reached across the table and took her hand. He gave me permission, she said finally, to move on, to be happy. Yes, Jack said. I think she stopped, searching for words. I think I have been waiting for that. Waiting for someone to tell me it was all right to stop grieving. You can grieve and be happy, Jack said. They're not opposites. They can exist together. She looked at him. Really looked at him. Seeing him clearly, perhaps for the first time. This quiet man who had taken in a stranger, who had defended her against his own community, who had given her space to heal without asking for anything in return. I think I am starting to be happy, she said softly. Here, with you and Clara. I did not think it was possible. Neither did I, he admitted. They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped across the table, the letter between them. Outside, birds were singing. Spring was coming. The world was turning green again. That afternoon, when Clara came home from school, she found Helene in the garden, planting seeds. What are those? She asked. Flowers, Helene said. Wildflowers from Germany. I saved the seeds before I left. I thought maybe they would not grow here. Different soil, different weather. But I want to try. Clara knelt beside her, watching her work. Will they bloom? I don't know, Helene said honestly. But even if they don't, it's worth trying. Clara considered this. Then she said, Papa says you're going to stay with us forever. Helene paused. Ditte, he says you're family now. Is that true? Helene looked at the child beside her. This little girl who had accepted her so completely, who had never seen her as an enemy, only as a person. Would you like that? She asked. Yes, Clara said simply. You make Papa smile. He hasn't smiled much since Mama died. And what about you? Helene asked. Do I make you smile? Clara grinned, showing the gap where her tooth had been. All the time. Helene pulled the child into a hug, holding her tight, breathing in the smell of playground dust and sunshine and possibility. Then yes, she said. I am staying. I am family. Summer came to Millbrook. The garage stayed busy with vacation travelers needing repairs. Helene proved to have a talent for the work. Her hands steady and sure. Her mind quick with diagnostics. Jack put her name on the business sign. Turner and Müller Garage. Some people complained. Others shrugged. Most simply got used to it. Helene became a fixture in the town, less remarkable with each passing week. The German woman who helped at the garage, the woman who made excellent bread and sold it at the farmer's market on Saturdays. Clara's second mother, though no one used that phrase out loud. Dale Murphy left town that summer, moved somewhere out west where he could nurse his grievances in private. Mary Thompson remained, her grief slowly transmuting from rage into something softer, though she never spoke directly to Helene. In August, the town held its annual summer festival. Jack hesitated about going, uncertain whether Helene would be welcome. But Clara begged, and Helene insisted she was not afraid. They walked through the fairgrounds together, the three of them. Clara ran ahead to the games, trying to win a stuffed bear with rings and bottles. Jack and Helene followed more slowly, aware of the eyes that tracked them but refusing to let it matter. At the bandstand, music played. Old standards, swing numbers from before the war. Without thinking, Jack offered his hand to Helene. Dance? She looked surprised, then pleased. I don't know American dancing. I'll teach you, he said. They moved onto the floor, joining other couples. Jack was not graceful, but he was steady, and Helene followed his lead. Around them, people watched. Some smiled, some frowned, but no one intervened. No one shouted or protested. It was, in its way, a kind of acceptance. Not perfect, not complete, but real. As they danced, Helene said quietly, I never thought I would feel this way again. Safe. Happy? Neither did I, Jack admitted. Are we being foolish? She asked. Two broken people thinking we can fix each other? I don't think we're fixing each other, Jack said. I think we're just reminding each other that broken things can still work. That scars don't mean the end. She rested her head against his shoulder, and they swayed together to music that had survived the war, just as they had. Autumn arrived with brilliant leaves and crisp mornings. The flowers Helene had planted in the spring bloomed spectacularly, bright patches of European color in the American soil. She took cuttings, started new plants, shared seeds with neighbors who asked. Clara started 3rd grade. She wrote an essay about her family that mentioned Helene prominently. The teacher read it with raised eyebrows but said nothing. Times were changing, slowly, imperceptibly, but changing nonetheless. In October, Jack closed the garage early one Friday afternoon. He told Helene he had errands to run, asked if she would watch Clara. She agreed, curious but not pressing. He returned 2 hours later with a ring. Nothing fancy, just a simple gold band with a small diamond. He had bought it from the jeweler in town, the same man who had sold him his first wedding ring 20 years earlier. That evening, after Clara was asleep, he and Helene sat on the porch. The air was cool, autumn settling in for good. He took the ring from his pocket. I know this is complicated, he said. I know people will talk. I know your husband has only been gone 2 years, and my wife 3. And maybe it's too soon. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and we've both learned that the hard way. He held out the ring. I'm not asking you to forget William. I'm not trying to replace him. But I'm asking if maybe we could build something new together. Something that honors both our pasts but doesn't stay trapped in them. Helene looked at the ring, then at him. Tears were forming in her eyes, but she was smiling. You want to marry me? Even with everything it will mean? The gossip? The judgment? I want to marry you because of who you are, Jack said simply. Everything else is just noise. She took the ring from his hand, slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. They married in November, a small ceremony at the courthouse with Clara as their only witness. No church wedding, no reception, no announcement in the newspaper. Just 3 people and a judge, making something official that had already become true. That night, they had dinner at home, the 3 of them. Clara had made a cake with Helene's help, lopsided and overly sweet but made with love. They ate it while sitting on the living room floor, laughing at nothing and everything, a family stitched together from loss and luck and stubborn hope. Winter came again, the second since Helene had arrived. But this time, she watched the snow fall without fear. She had a home now, a family, a place where she belonged. The garage stayed open through the cold months, the wood stove glowing in the corner, keeping Jack and Helene warm as they worked. They fell into an easy partnership, anticipating each other's needs, moving around each other with practiced efficiency. In the evenings, they taught Clara her lessons at the kitchen table. Mathematics and spelling and history that had to be rewritten now that the war was over and the world had changed. Helene helped with the German lessons that Clara's teacher struggled with. Jack helped with the science experiments that Helene still found mysterious. They were ordinary, beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. And that ordinariness felt like the greatest gift either of them had ever received. One evening in February, nearly 2 years since Helene had first stepped off that ship in New York, she stood at the kitchen window watching snow fall. Jack came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far I've come," she said. "Not just in distance. In everything. I was so lost when I arrived. So certain I would never find my way. And now I am found," she said simply. She turned in his arms to face him. "You found me. Clara found me. I found myself. We found each other," he corrected. She smiled. "Yes, we did." They stood together in the warm kitchen, looking out at the cold world, safe and together and home. Spring returned. The third spring since the war had ended. Helene's flowers bloomed again, bigger and brighter than before. She had expanded the garden, teaching Clara how to tend the plants, how to coax beauty from dirt and water and patience. The garage had a waiting list now. Word had spread about the quality of their work, about the fair prices and honest dealings. People came from neighboring towns, some of them German Americans who had been afraid to show their heritage during the war, who saw in Helene a kind of permission to be themselves again. In May, Helene discovered she was pregnant. She told Jack on a Sunday morning, the words simple and stunning. "We're going to have a baby." He stared at her for a long moment, joy and fear warring on his face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she said, laughing at his expression. "Is it all right? Are you happy?" "Happy," he repeated, then pulled her into his arms. "Yes, God, yes, I'm happy." Clara was ecstatic when they told her. She immediately began planning, deciding what color to paint the nursery, what toys the baby would need, whether she would prefer a brother or a sister. Her excitement was infectious, filling the house with an energy it had never had before. The town's reaction was mixed. Some congratulated them, genuinely. Others muttered about the impropriety of it all. A German woman and an American veteran, bringing more Germans into the world. But their voices were quieter now, less certain, drowned out by those who had learned that kindness cost nothing and cruelty cost everything. The baby arrived in January of 1949. A girl they named Sarah after Jack's first wife, and Anna after Helene's mother. Little Sarah Anna Turner came into the world crying lustily, her tiny fists waving, claiming her space in a family that had been built from ruins. Clara held her sister carefully, her face full of wonder. "She's so small," she whispered. "You were this small once," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "Was I?" Clara seemed amazed by the concept. "Smaller, even," Helene said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "You were the tiniest thing I had ever seen." Jack looked at his family, this improbable collection of people who should not have come together but had, and felt something like peace settle over him. The war was finally, truly over. Not because the fighting had stopped or treaties had been signed, but because life had reasserted itself. Because hope had proved stronger than hate. Years passed. The garage thrived. Clara grew into a thoughtful teenager who spoke 3 languages and wanted to be a doctor. Sarah Anna toddled and then walked and then ran, her laughter filling the house with light. Helene never lost her accent, never stopped grieving for the country she had left and the people she had lost. But she built a new life alongside the old one, carried both with grace and strength. Jack's hair went gray. His hands grew rough from work, but they were steady when they held his daughters, when they touched his wife, when they repaired the broken things people brought to him. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Millbrook changed. Other war brides arrived, brought by other veterans. Japanese Americans returned from internment camps, rebuilding lives in towns that had betrayed them. The world learned, slowly and painfully, that the line between enemy and friend was thinner than anyone wanted to believe. One summer evening, when Sarah Anna was 5 and Clara was preparing to leave for college, the family sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Helene held Jack's hand, her head on his shoulder, feeling the weight of the years and the lightness of the moment. "Tell me a story," Sarah Anna demanded, as she did every evening. "What kind of story?" Helene asked. "A true one," the girl said. "About when you were young," Helene considered. There were so many stories she could tell. About Dresden burning, about the prison camp, about crossing the ocean, in terror and hope. about stepping off that ship into a country that did not want her. But tonight, she chose a different story. Once, she began, there was a woman who had lost everything. Her home, her family, her country, everything. She thought her life was over, that all the good things had been used up. Sarah Anna snuggled closer. What happened? She got on a boat, Helene continued, and she sailed to a new land. And there, she met a kind man and his daughter. And slowly, day by day, she realized something. What? Sarah Anna asked. That endings are not always endings, Helene said. Sometimes they are beginnings in disguise. Clara, listening from her spot on the porch railing, smiled. Jack squeezed Helene's hand. Sarah Anna nodded seriously, as if this were a great truth she would carry with her. And maybe it was. Maybe that was the story worth telling. Not about war, or loss, or suffering, though those were part of it, but about what came after, about the stubborn, difficult, beautiful work of building peace, one day, one choice, one act of kindness at a time. The fireflies continued their ancient dance. The evening air smelled of cut grass and Helene's flowers and something else, something indefinable. The smell of home, perhaps, of family, of second chances gratefully taken. Are there more stories? Sarah Anna asked sleepily. Thousands, Helene said. We have our whole lives to tell them. And they did. In that house at the end of the tree-lined street. In that town that had learned slowly to see beyond nationality to humanity. They built a life, made of stories. Stories of loss and survival, of fear and courage, of hatred overcome and love discovered. They were not perfect. They carried their scars, their nightmares, their grief. But they carried them together. And that made all the difference. The war had tried to teach them to hate, but they had learned something else instead. They had learned that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of grace. That home is not a place, but a choice. That family is not only blood, but also the bonds we forge in the fire of shared suffering and shared joy. Helene had come to America speechless, shocked by the coldness of her reception, uncertain whether she would survive. But she had not just survived. She had lived, had loved, had built something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had burned. And on summer evenings like this one, with her family gathered close and the world at peace, at least for this moment, she understood what her husband had meant in that final letter. The war had taken so much, but it had not taken everything. It had not taken the capacity to hope, to trust, to begin again. We didn't come to find America, she thought, watching her daughters, holding her husband's hand. We came to find peace, and against all odds, impossibly, miraculously, we did.